They told her to stay close, but when she looked up, they were gone. Beat, no roads, no map, just an endless prairie and a child left behind. In the spring of 1867, the Carson family joined a wagon train heading west, just one of thousands chasing a new life across the frontier. Like most families, they packed light: flour, beans, tools, and hope. The rest they'd have to figure out along the way. 8-year-old Clara was the youngest of three. Small for her age, quiet but sharp-eyed. She noticed everything: the way the sky changed color before a storm, how the older boys made whistles from willow branches, or how her father's boots wore down faster on the left side. She wasn't spoiled. There was no room for that. Her mother sewed her just one calico dress to last the journey, and her prized possession was a small wooden doll her father carved from pine. She named it Liddy. It went everywhere with her. The days were long and repetitive. Walk, ride, rest, repeat. Food was rationed carefully: dried beans, hardtack, salt pork. Clara learned quickly not to complain. Whining didn't help when your water tasted like metal or your feet ached from walking 10 miles. Still, to her, it all felt like an adventure. At night, her family huddled close under patchwork quilts, her father telling stories while coyotes howled in the distance. There were dangers: snakes, broken wheels, sudden storms, but nothing felt truly frightening, not yet. 6 weeks in, things grew harder. The oxen were tiring. Tempers flared more often. Clara's mother had a cough that wouldn't go away, and the trail, which had once felt like a path to freedom, now stretched on like a challenge sent by God himself. Then came the day no one ever forgot. The Carson wagon had camped near a bend in the creek that morning, one of those brief rest stops meant to refill barrels and shoe the oxen. It was chaos as usual. The wheel on the back axle needed greasing, a neighbor's mule had broken its harness, and Clara's older brother had come down with a fever overnight. Everyone was distracted. Clara had been told to stay close, but close meant different things to a child. She followed the creek bank a little ways downstream. Not far, maybe 30, 40 yards. She was chasing a toad at first, then found a patch of wild currants. Half ripe, half sour, but edible. She didn't call out. She wanted to surprise her mother with something sweet. By the time she turned around, the wagons had already begun to move. This was common. Wagon trains didn't wait for one family to catch up. They moved on a tight schedule, especially near hostile territory. Delays could mean disaster. Clara's father must have assumed she was in the wagon. Her mother must have been tending to the sick boy. Everyone trusted that someone else had eyes on Clara. In truth, no one had noticed. She saw the dust before she understood what it meant. The trail was broad and rutted, and the oxen kicked up dirt as they lumbered forward. She began running, but children's legs don't carry far on dry prairie soil. She shouted until her voice broke. No one heard her. She chased that dust trail for almost a mile. Then the wagons dipped out of sight over a low ridge and were gone, alone. And not just alone in the way we think of it today. There were no fences, no roads, no distant farmhouse, just open prairie, hundreds of miles of it, and the distant sound of wind brushing through grass that stood taller than she did. At first, she sat still. Crying didn't help. She clutched Liddy and tried to remember what to do. Her father had always said, "If you ever get lost, stay where you are. Someone will come back for you." So she waited. But by afternoon, the sun was high and the insects came in swarms. Her canteen was in the wagon. She had no blanket, no food, no way to track time. Only her doll, a few sour currants, and the fading prints of wagon wheels heading west. It wasn't until the sun began to fall that she realized no one was coming back. Not today, maybe not ever. As the sun began to sink, the prairie changed. What had looked golden and endless by day turned gray and unfamiliar by dusk. The tall grass whispered in strange voices. Shadows stretched across the earth like reaching hands. For the first time in her life, Clara understood what real darkness meant. Darkness without lamps, without voices, without walls. Her first instinct was to walk, keep moving, find someone. But every direction looked the same, and prairie travel without landmarks was dangerous, even for adults. She remembered what her father once said around the campfire. The fastest way to die out here is to walk in circles after sunset. So she stopped. She found a patch of low grass near the creek bank and curled into it, pulling her knees tight against her chest. She had no blanket, no fire. The ground was already cold and she could feel the chill rising through her dress. She thought about Liddy, her doll, and tucked it under her arm like a sleeping friend. It helped. A little. Then came the noises. Coyotes first. Their howls echoed across the plains, distant but not too distant. Then the whine of wind whipping through tall grass. Occasionally a rustle or crack nearby would snap her eyes open. She couldn't see anything, but the prairie was alive in ways she'd never noticed before. She tried to stay awake, but fear is exhausting. Hunger gnawed at her stomach, and the cold made her jaw tremble. When her eyes did finally close, it was not because she felt safe, but because her small body had reached its limit. She drifted in and out of sleep. Half dreams filled her mind. Her mother's voice, the smell of biscuits, the sound of wagon wheels crunching gravel. Then a jolt would wake her, and she'd remember. She wasn't home. She was alone, with nothing but open sky above and dirt beneath. She made it through that first night by instinct, by staying low, keeping still, and waiting. Many children who disappeared on the frontier didn't. But Clara had just enough sense, just enough memory, and just enough luck to survive until sunrise. And when the sun finally did rise, it didn't bring relief. By the second morning, Clara expected voices. Footsteps, a father's shout from over the ridge, maybe a neighbor's face peeking through the grass, calling her name. But the only thing that came was heat. The prairie sun rises fast and gives no warning. By mid-morning, the air shimmered. Her dress, still damp from the dew of the night before, dried stiff against her skin. She had no hat, no water, just the sound of insects and her own shallow breathing. She climbed a small rise near the creek and scanned the distance. Nothing. Not a wagon, not a horse, not even smoke. And that's when the truth began to set in. Not all at once, but in slow pieces. No one was coming back. Not because they didn't care, but because they didn't know. Wagon trains didn't stop unless someone shouted. A missing child wasn't noticed until camp was made and roll was called. And by then, it was miles too late. Turning around meant risking everyone's safety. Supplies were thin, roads were unmarked. Backtracking could take days, and many didn't survive the delay. Even if her family begged the others to help, the group might have said no. This was one of the cruelest truths of the frontier. Survival often demanded sacrifice, and sometimes that sacrifice came in the shape of a child's empty bedroll. Clara didn't know all this in detail, of course. She didn't know about trail politics or the code of the wagon master. But what she did know, deep in her gut, was that something had gone wrong, that something had shifted. She was no longer part of a journey. She was now a question mark, forgotten on the trail. And so she stopped waiting. She stopped sitting still. Hunger had become pain. Her lips were cracked, her feet blistered. If she wanted to live, she would have to move, but not blindly. She would follow the creek. Water meant animals, and where there were animals, there might be people. It was a gamble, but she was 8 years old alone, and already 2 days into a story that no child should ever have to live. She didn't know it by name, but Clara was following one of the first rules of frontier survival: always follow the water. The creek curved lazily across the prairie, sometimes shallow, sometimes lost in reeds, but always moving. It gave her a path, a rhythm, and something to listen to besides her own thoughts. She drank small sips when the water looked clear and slow. Her father had once told her, "Drink upstream of the animals, never downstream." She didn't quite understand why, but she remembered it now. She remembered more than she thought she would. She remembered how her mother said to watch where birds land, because they stay near water. How her older brother once said that ants follow moisture. How certain plants only grow where the soil is damp enough to hold life. These small scraps of wisdom, overheard in moments that seemed ordinary, were now all she had. Food was trickier. She knew what wild currants looked like, and she knew not to touch the white berries that grew in clusters. Her father called them snake fruit. She remembered which cactus pads held water, and that sometimes you could suck on a pebble to keep your mouth from drying out. But the hunger didn't go away. It became a dull, constant ache, the kind that made her legs wobble and her thoughts drift. On the third day, she found a dead bird near the creek bank. She didn't touch it. She didn't have a knife, no way to cook, and some part of her still held the line between desperate and dangerous. But she stared at it for a long time. And that night she dreamed of biscuits, big, fluffy ones with butter and wild honey. When she woke, she cried without sound. To make it through even one day on the prairie required more than strength. It required memory, and a kind of quiet cleverness that most adults didn't expect from a child. But Clara had been watching, listening. All those dull campfire talks and chores she used to complain about. They had taught her what school books never could. Now they were keeping her alive. By the fourth day, Clara was no longer just hungry. She was hollow. Her thoughts didn't follow straight lines anymore. They drifted. She would think of her mother's hands, then forget what they looked like. She'd try to remember her own name, and it would take longer than it should. That's what the prairie does when you're alone too long. It quiets everything. Then it whispers. She began to see shapes in the distance. Wagons, maybe, or riders. Once, she was certain she heard a fiddle. Another time, she smelled campfire smoke. Each time, her heart surged. She would scramble to her feet and stumble toward the sound or the shimmer, only to find grass, or wind, or nothing. They weren't hallucinations, not exactly. Just tricks of the mind, the brain reaching for what it needed. Company, comfort, rescue, anything but the silence. One evening, she found a broken length of rope tied around a low bush. It looked like wagon gear, frayed, sun-bleached, but familiar. She froze. Could they have passed nearby? Could this mean she was close? She waited there until sundown, staring at the rope, willing it to become something more. But no voices came, no footsteps, just the cry of a hawk overhead and the slow crawl of night. That was when she nearly gave up. Her legs hurt too much to stand. Her head pounded, and that small, childish part of her, the one that still believed her father might come riding back with a blanket and a smile, was fading. But even then, she didn't stop. She couldn't explain why. Maybe it was instinct. Maybe it was the fear of dying out here, of being swallowed by the prairie like so many others. Or maybe it was something quieter, a voice in her chest that said, "Keep going." So she did, one foot, then the other. Not because she knew where she was going, but because stopping felt like giving up on the people who might still be out there looking. It was the fifth day. Clara's feet were torn and swollen. She had stopped crying 2 days ago, not because the fear was gone, but because the tears had run out. Her lips were split. Her dress was ripped. She no longer noticed the hunger, only the staggering exhaustion that made her legs feel like sticks barely held together. That morning, she had crawled beneath a crooked juniper tree for shade, half aware, half dreaming. She might have stayed there for good if not for a sound. Faint but real, hoofbeats, slow, cautious, one horse. She didn't move at first. Could have been another dream. But then a voice followed, low, gruff, surprised. "Hey there." She opened her eyes. A man, bearded and sunburned, sat atop a chestnut mare. He wasn't dressed like a soldier or a preacher, more like a homesteader or trapper. His hat was torn, his rifle slung behind his back. He looked like the land itself had built him. For a long second, neither of them said a word. Then Clara sat up, swaying like a sapling in the wind. He climbed down slowly, speaking in a soft voice now, as if approaching a wild animal. "You hurt?" Clara shook her head no, or maybe yes. She couldn't tell. He pulled a water skin from his saddle and held it out. She reached for it like it might vanish, then drank until it ran down her chin. It was warm, but it tasted like life. The man didn't ask too many questions, not right away. He wrapped her in a wool blanket and lifted her into the saddle, careful not to spook the horse. As they rode, he muttered to himself, words she didn't understand, maybe prayers. She fell asleep before they reached his homestead, a half-built cabin, 2 goats, a cooking fire. It wasn't much, but it was more than enough. Later, when she woke up and could speak again, he asked her name. When she said it, he looked startled. He had heard about a lost child on the trail days earlier. Rumors passed between travelers heading east. No one had expected her to be alive. The man sent word to a nearby town. A rider took the news to a station, and from there to the next wagon train moving west. Days later, Clara's father arrived, dusty, gaunt, and shaking when he saw her. They didn't speak right away, just held each other. Then he whispered over and over, "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." But Clara didn't say anything, not at first. Clara never spoke much about those 5 days, not when they finally reached Oregon. Not years later when she married, raised children, and had a farm of her own. If someone asked, she'd offer a smile, but in quiet moments, it showed. The way she scanned the horizon without realizing it. How she hated sleeping without a lamp lit. How she never, not once, let her children wander out of sight. Clara's story was one kind of fight, the kind you survive with heart and grit. In our next episode, we're going deep into the brutal world of pioneer hunting. The raw skills, deadly tools, and desperate moments that meant life or a slow death in the wild. Don't miss Life or Death Pioneer, hunting forgotten bushcraft and survival techniques.